Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Fancy Schmancy podcast. I am your host, a Pomeranian Prince, and today's topic is about forging an identity. What makes a good podcast? That is the question. What makes a good podcast? The reason why I asked this question is because there's a difference between developing and making your podcast versus actually doing your podcast, actually making the podcast and letting the magic do its work. And I think the reason for this is because a lot of people are terrified of doing podcasts, especially those who may be passionate in it. They may make excuses for it, such as not having finances, which I'm not saying if you are financially strapped for cash that, I'm not saying you're a liar. However, a lot of people tend to make excuses for not doing the things that they want to do because something sunk cost fallacy or something that takes too much time. And I think it's a very, very interesting concept. People will make excuses to not want to better themselves or to not do the things that they want to do or need to do. It's a very interesting concept, and I don't exactly know what they call it in the psychology world, but I am interested in looking up this phenomenon and everything else. But enough about psychology talk, let's talk about podcasts. So when I came in making my own podcast, I already knew exactly what it was going to be. I knew it was going to be a podcast that was dedicated to art and media analysis. It was going to be a podcast that functioned as a brain dump for videos that may not be able to be compiled in a comprehensive video essay manner. And it also served as a good way for me to expand my horizons. Another thing that I knew going into the podcast was the overall aesthetic and also exactly what the podcast was going to entail. Aside from art and media analysis, I knew it was going to be a solo podcast. It was going to be hosted by yours truly, and it was going to be released on a monthly basis. Why a monthly basis? Largely because these type of podcasts are generally easy for me to edit and push out, whereas my video essays do tend to take a lot more work. Not just in terms of video essays, what the hell am I saying? Not just in terms of, but point being is that it takes a lot of work from not just video editing, the video editing aspect, but it also takes a lot of work research-wise, and that can be quite tiring and grueling. And for someone like me who is working a 9-to-5 job, that may not be feasible. Back in college, I was able to do a lot of the research that I wanted to do because I was a college student, but now I'm an actual adult. I have bills to take care of. I have financial obligations that I need to take care of. That's kind of not feasible anymore, and that does kind of break my heart because I really do enjoy making video essays. I do enjoy putting in the work. There's a reason why a lot of big YouTubers are able to push out video essays, and that's largely because they have a team behind them. They have a team that's doing the research, they have a team that's doing the video editing, they have the team that's doing the writing and the script making. And then you have me, who is just simply a one-man band, which is definitely ideal in the journalism world, but in the world of YouTube, it's really not a talent. At least in my opinion, it's not that much of a talent. Like, everybody else can make thumbnails. Ooh, what makes me so special from the other people in class? Maybe that's just my pessimism speaking, but whatever. My biggest fear when it comes to this podcast is actually committing to the podcast in question, which I know sounds rather hypocritical considering that I talked about how many people will make excuses about doing the things they want to do, and this is something that I clearly wanted to do, but I do have my reasons for it. Reason number one, and the biggest one for me, is the fear of failure and not really getting the attention that I shouldn't say my podcast deserves, because at the end of the day, it's a podcast. I don't really care about how much views it gets. If it gets 10 views, that'll at least make me happy. I just have an overall fear of this podcast not working out, and I may have to eventually drop it. Which leads me to my next point, which is the fear of the sunk cost fallacy. So for those who don't know what the sunk cost fallacy means, the sunk cost fallacy refers to an idea of you needing to drop something or abandon something, but you can't because you realize how much time and or money you have invested into the thing in particular. So a perfect example of this is gacha games. Gacha games are generally seen as an addictive and exploitative way for companies to make money off of gamers. One person may think that they want to quit doing gacha games altogether, but then they rationalize it by saying, oh, well, I invested like $2,000 into this gacha game. Do I really want to give up on it now? Which is interesting because, the person knows they want to quit, but they can't bring themselves to quit, so they have rationalizations behind it. It's just very beautiful in terms of how your brain is able to realize that it needs to change, but it comes with defense mechanism after defense mechanism to protect itself and to make sure that the status quo is intact. It's some very interesting psychology stuff, and I really, really am going to be looking forward to doing deep dives about it and looking into it. So one thing I definitely have in mind in terms of this podcast is to commission artists. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like my thumbnail style, but the thing is, it's really only effective for video essays and not really for podcasts. With podcasts, I definitely want my podcast to stand out. And that's why I'm looking into commissioning artists, because I know I can at least get that uniqueness out of it. I've already been looking into coffee, and I've seen quite a few people's commissions regarding YouTube thumbnail art, and the most I'm willing to pay for now is at least $25 per thumbnail. Which, thinking about it, 25 times 12, what would that be? 12 is 100, 200. So about $300 in total if I were to commit into this podcast for the entire year. Which really isn't that bad if you think about it. $300 for a thumbnail? Well, not for a thumbnail, but $300 for 12 sets of thumbnails? That's pretty cheap, all things considered. Pretty cheap. Also, if you guys do have a coffee or if you are open for commissions, I would greatly appreciate comments regarding that, so that way I can take a look at your art and see if I would like to commission it. I always like to hear from artists and whether or not their commissions are open. I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to talk about for the first episode of this podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.